This is Scott Richmond.
And Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. Hey, Arnie, how is the high-speed internet where you live?
Not good, Scott.
I know.
It's been going downhill. I won't name the company that we both subscribe to, but it's been going downhill.
That's not good.
But the world around us, as we have often spoken about on our show, continues to get more complex and confusing.
Yes.
And, sort of crowded with things that you need to understand and either be happy about or worry about. In many cases, worry about.
Well, you have to have a degree in technology, right, to kind of understand how to go through the day. Like how your phone works, how your TV works, how your microwave works.
Even Alexa changes up on me and gives different answers to the same question, depending on the mood she's in.
Did you get an Alexa?
I have Alexa.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I asked her who was going to win the Super Bowl. She didn't help me out too much.
Okay. Actually,
she did. She said, a lot of people like New England, but, the Philadelphia Eagles haven't won in a long time, right. And I'm rooting for the Eagles. She actually said that.
Good for her.
But this issue that has really, in Montana in particular, has monopolized a lot of time and a lot of interest is net neutrality.
Yes.
And I'm not sure people have a very firm understanding of what is involved, all the issues related to keeping the net neutral as it often is, described.
Right, as it is currently, right? It is neutral.
It is available and accessible to everyone without prejudice or bias.
Based on who they are or what they're watching or viewing.
Right.
Or consuming.
And the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, voted to end net neutrality.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people that have lined up in the industry on both sides of this issue, proponents and opponents of net neutrality. And there is going to actually be on February 27th, there's going to be sort of a net neutrality day in which people who are concerned about the issue are supposed to focus and talk to their legislators, because there's a chance, just because the FCC voted on party lines to approve net neutrality, there's also a thing called the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress to supersede or override the decision of an agency.
Sure.
And people are looking for the votes to do that if they think it's right. Montana is one of two states that passed a bill in support of maintaining net neutrality.
This is going to be a fun conversation.
The other one being New York.
Right.
Our guest on the show today, Roslyn Layton, who's with the American Enterprise Institute, is a scholar, was involved in the Trump transition team in this area, thinks that Montana's position on this is wrong and, in fact, is unconstitutional, that a state cannot challenge, the federal level. The response from the Attorney General's office in the state, actually not the governor's legal counsel on this matter, says the only thing that we did is say that we buy a lot of internet media.
Bandwidth.
We buy a lot of bandwidth. We spend millions of dollars in Montana on bandwidth, and we've taken a position we're not going to buy from anybody that doesn't support net neutrality. Absolutely. That's not unconstitutional, as I can understand it.
Right.
And I think when Roslyn comes on, we can ask her about it. But there are a lot of other, issues related to new fees or controlling bandwidth or censoring content. The opponents of net neutrality, say it won't change things very much and things will get bundled just the way they are with cable TV and with satellite TV. It's not going to be much of a big deal. We should allow the free market to operate and you won't notice much of a difference. The supporters of net neutrality say, ask anybody who has cable TV or satellite TV how happy they are with how things have progressed over time.
Exactly.
And there are issues about, if someone wants to suppress information or slow down the speed of people who aren't on the system or offer different packages in different parts of, the country.
Right.
And in fact, the richer get better service and the people that can't afford the most expensive package get poor service.
Right.
which is not how it exists today.
That's exactly right.
So it's a very, I think,
Slippery slope.
And there are people on both sides that you'd be surprised that whose side they're on. Consumer advocates, by and large, are on the side of proponents for net neutrality. On the other side, there are a whole host of people who wanted to
big business.
Well, some big business people like Mark Cuban, are not supporters of net neutrality. They say it shouldn't be regulated in that way. It should be more free market. So, Roslyn is an expert in this area. Her expertise is in evidence-based studying of digital technology. She's Danish by background, and although she did study in the United States at American University, and she's a visiting scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a known conservative think tank, just to be fair for our listeners to understand that. And she has a particular point of view on this, and we're going to have a conversation with her about it.
I'm looking forward to speaking to Roslyn. You are listening to What Do You Know, proudly supported and sponsored by Engel & Volker's Luxury Real Estate and our good friend Dawn Maddox. Back after this with Roslyn Layton.
Roslyn Layton, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are things in? You're in Missoula. I wasn't sure exactly.
Yep, we're in Missoula, Montana. Things are as well as could be expected this time of year here in Missoula. We for our listeners, we gave a little bit of a background on the issue of net neutrality and where it kind of stands at the moment. But could you kind of give us a history of how we got to where we are?
Right. So I'm not sure if you've talked about what's happened in Montana with regard to the governor's recent action, but we've been fighting. There's been a battle going on for 10 years or more, and most of the countries in the world that have net neutrality rules, they've been where we are. They've been through this process where they fight between the regulators and so on. And at the end of the day, people say, well, if you want to regulate something, it needs to be done by the rule of law, and the Congress has to define that authority. It needs to make it lawful to do so. So in our case in the United States, the last time Congress weighed in on the issue of Internet regulation was 1996. So what happened in December 2017 was the Republican-led FCC removed Internet regulation that was imposed by the Obama administration in 2015. And so we went back to the framework that worked very well for 30 years. We had a lot of success with it. The Internet bloomed. We had $1.5 trillion of investment. But since that time in December, a number of states, including Montana, decided, well, we're just going to make our own Internet policy. We're our own state. We're just going to create our own little Internet here and impose our own little rules, and that's the way we're going to do that. Well, you may think that's fine, but we do have a constitution in the United States, and states are not allowed to make, we have something called interstate commerce, and they can't regulate their own Internet. It's against the law. But unfortunately, the governor did make an executive order that can be undone by a future governor, but it's not clear how it could be enforced. It's symbolic politics, unfortunately. It's not something real for the people of Montana, other than those who think regulating the Internet is a good idea. But in any case, now we're going to get into big legal battles, as we are around the country. And what we should be doing is going back to our Congress and having the real discussion there. That's where the will of the people decide. Well, 2 points that I would like to make that you could certainly respond to. One, in speaking, I did mention in the intro to the show about the law we passed, and speaking with the governor's legal counsel recently about the law, they said it simply is making a requirement that state contracts, because the state buys a lot of broadband, that state contracts are only done with vendors that follow net neutrality. That's how they describe the law. And I'm not an attorney, and sure. And Scott's not an attorney. We can take that point. Sure. Well, so first of all, what's interesting is that the companies that do business with the state of Montana, they've actually agreed to uphold the net neutrality principles. They've already come out for years, and they've been saying, we're not blocking, we're not throttling, we don't do paid prioritization. So a lot of these companies have already agreed to those things. So you don't need to make a law to what companies agree to. And by the way, We talked about other countries. The most successful net neutrality rules have been the voluntary ones where companies just do the right thing.
Right.
So, in any case,
but companies that do the right thing, I wouldn't bet my life that they continue to do the right thing. They do what's good for their own pocketbooks in general. I mean, that's just the way, things generally go, particularly in this arena. You also mentioned the fact that it worked for 30 years and that it changed under the Obama administration. But, 1996 to 2016 or 2017 to 2018, a lot of things have happened in the Internet world in terms of, speed, in terms of, basically controlling bandwidth and all sorts of other kinds of changes that may be required further looking at what kinds of outcomes would come as a result of free and unbridled capitalism in the Internet world.
Okay. Well, so you've made a lot of very, very important points. What we saw during the period of this policy where the FTC is able to go after bad actors, the Department of Justice and the state's attorneys general. We had $1.5 trillion of investment. We had all the big Internet companies that you know. Speeds increased 3,000 times. Prices fell by 90%. Now, that might not be good enough for some people. In most people's books, that's a success. Now, if you're not happy with that and say, well, we could do better, fine. Let's have the decision in the Congress where we, the people, can decide, not by 5 unelected commissioners who are being told by the president what to do. So I'm not denying that maybe you would say, well, things are different. We might need new rules. Fair enough. But let's have a fair and open discussion where we can all weigh in in a democratic way. That's not the way the rules were made.
Sure, and I think that's obviously a very legitimate point. Here's what some people have said to me, and I wanted to hear your reaction to it. Yeah. If you look at who the proponents of net neutrality are, they include consumer groups, people like Yahoo and eBay and Amazon and Microsoft and Twitter and all that. And then you look at, some of the opponents of net neutrality, and they're, by and large, the big telcos. And if you just looked at how things lined up, just from an outside observation, it would look like that, that there is a particular, bias in terms of the folks that want it look like they're the ones that would profit the most from it.
So you're absolutely right on there. I mean, this is part of the reason, many folks like myself have been very skeptical about this because you do have a lot of big companies doing battle. You have on the one hand Google and Facebook and Netflix and Amazon. So some of these companies have more money than entire countries, okay? They are going against telecom companies, right, which of course are big. They're not as big as the Silicon Valley companies. And this isn't, in their minds, they're fighting about getting price controls. So the Googles and Netflixes of the world that deliver 80% of the traffic, they don't pay for the networks in Missoula. They're not paying one red cent for you to get any Internet access, but they're more than happy to send you a lot of information. So folks like me, I'm a consumer advocate, by the way, but I don't, I'm not involved in one of these advocacy groups, but I'm a consumer. My friends and family, people I care about, we're buying Internet access. We don't think it's fair that we should have to pay for the films of Harvey Weinstein. We don't want to pay for information that we're never going to see. We don't think it's fair that we should have to pay for the infrastructure to deliver content that is offensive, right? That could be illegal, all of that. So we're saying those companies should pay for it or work out a deal somehow or another. Don't put that on me.
Right.
Now,
I understand
the Super Bowl. That was a lot of fun. Now, the Super Bowl was made possible because you had a lot of sponsors, right? You had the different companies. What the Internet freedom is about is saying, okay, you, Google and Netflix, you guys are delivering a lot of content. You should start to pay for the roads. You shouldn't put it all on the people of Missoula to pay for everything, right? We're going to share in the cost, and we're going to find some equitable way to do it. Net neutrality says, people of Missoula, you must pay 100% of the cost. No one else is allowed to contribute, and that's the end of the story.
Well, this sort of, to me, in Missoula, lines up in many ways like the old debate about taxes for schools. People say here, right, I don't have any kids that go to school. Why should I have to pay for a new high school? And other people say, well, I don't have kids either, but I don't want a lot of dumb people living around me. I'd rather have kids that are educated. I mean, right. It is a tough line to cross to say I only want to pay for the content that I want to see, and I don't want it available.
Let's take that point. I think
sure.
Education is extremely important. This is a very good point where the education and the Internet debates are not exactly analogous.
Right.
Because when it comes to the Internet, 80% of the content is entertainment. It's not educational content. The content that's the most valuable part of the Internet comprises about 1 or 2%. So I personally advocate that we make some of the Internet free for everyone. Things like health information, bus schedules, maybe things around the weather, some basic level that doesn't matter. You don't even have to have a subscription. Anything that has a .gov, maybe the governor of Missouri's website should be free. I advocate that we should make a basic part of the Internet that we know everybody has to see, that should be free, and the entertainment part, for which we all have different tastes and preferences. Maybe some people want to watch fishing, someone else would want to watch whatever movies. Fair enough, but then we allow that to be flexible. And in that case, we would only provisioning 1 or 2% of the bandwidth for the socially valuable content is such a low cost that the companies would deliver it for free.
Sure, I understand your point, and that's there's a lot of validity to that. And in reality, as you know, we already pay for some of the content that's on the Internet. Like if you want Netflix subscription through the Internet, you have to pay for it, and you have to pay for other entertainment venues that are on the Internet. The question is, how much control, how little control, is 1 or 2% enough? And then I think it gets complicated, at least from a bystander point of view, when wrapped into it is, and I've seen this again with satellite TV, wrapping in this, well, we'll do it, but you won't get fast enough. You'll get slow speed. Right. If you really want to get all this stuff and you want to have complete access, then you're going to have to pay, a privileged amount.
Right.
Or you're going to just get slow service. And we all know that folks who get slow service are going to not watch those shows that are socially important to them.
Right. Well, what I would say is we're having a great discussion on this, and I think all of these points are important and valid. And that's what I would say, that I think ordinary people can have this discussion in Congress. It shouldn't be up to the choice of, only the FCC and people who happen to have an Internet connection and then write and send an email and say, I want X, Y, Z. I mean, that's not fair. There's a lot of people who maybe are not online. Maybe they would get online, and that they're not being included. So I think this is a real discussion that we should have as a people, in the Congress.
Right. And do you think we're headed that way? Do you think that the Congressional Review Act will be implemented, and there will be a not only a review but an open discussion and open debate about this?
Well, so historically, this issue was very bipartisan. It was probably the most consensus-oriented. Everybody was on the same page. We said the Internet is great. Let's go for it. It sounds, it's exciting. It's innovative. Let's go for it. So that was the last time in 1996. And for the most part, it worked well. And I agree, we have issues now. But by the way, it's not just telecom companies we're worried about. We have a lot of other concerns here.
Well, for sure. There's no question about that.
Right. So, but in any case, first of all, the Congressional Review Act was designed for Congress to communicate to the bureaucracy that they disapproved of a regulation it adopted. The Congressional Review Act was not supposed to reimpose regulation. So it was used a lot in 2017 to remove regulations that were imposed at the last part of President Obama's term. And so the way that the Senate is attempting to use it now is not its purpose. I'm not optimistic that it will pass. And if it passes the Senate, it's unlikely to pass the House because the votes aren't there. and then the president has indicated that he won't sign it. But the bigger picture is that there are now lawsuits all over the place. There are 7 petitions at the Supreme Court. A lot of parties said that they're going to sue the FCC. The Supreme Court can come in April as when they're scheduled to decide whether or not they hear it. They can simply say, all of this goes back to you at FCC, this stuff is over and done with, and we're out of here. They could also choose to hear the complaints. Interestingly enough, the guy who invented voice over IP, if you use Skype, you can thank him, he is suing the FCC because Net Neutrality shut down his new app. He was trying to make an innovative app for high-definition voice, and it was not legal to launch with the Net Neutrality rules. So he's suing under the First Amendment because users can't speak on his app. So in any case, we've now unleashed a Pandora's box. A lot of states are trying to do their own rules. So unfortunately, we will have a lot of litigation going on. But I do hope vital shows such as yours will try to present for audiences what this is really about. It shouldn't be designed as a sense of, as it's been polarized. There are real issues at play that we can talk through, and I'm confident that we can come to a consensus, particularly because the companies themselves have already agreed voluntarily to uphold a lot of the rules. It's just a matter of Congress.
Which companies?
So, for example, AT&T, they've promoted something called the Internet Bill of Rights. What they would like to have all the Internet companies get involved, so the Googles and Facebooks would also have to agree to uphold no blocking, no throttling, and so on. And, if anything, I think that says we should have fairness, that we should have the same standards for everyone, particularly because the Internet companies are bigger. But Verizon, they've already, they verbally came forward to agree to those things. I think that on paper, they've agreed to the 2010 rules that the FCC had. So that's there. The issue here, though, is that the complaint that the telecom companies bring is that they don't like the instrument of Title II, which was the telephone regulation. And that has almost 900 capabilities in it, which allows the FCC to set the price of broadband. They can add taxes to it. They can mandate technologies. So for a lot of companies, it's sort of beyond the pale because particularly in a place like Montana, if you're a small company, it kills your business case. Many banks will not lend money to companies who are regulated under Title II because they say their business case is gone. The FCC could decide to regulate the price, and therefore their investment in a new network, they can't recover their investment because the FCC would mandate a price at a certain point, and it wouldn't be viable. So, or they'd say, well, you invested in a wireless technology, and the FCC requires wireline. Sorry, we're not going to invest in your company. So the sad part is, no one's worried about the AT&Ts of the world. What we're worried about is the small companies, the family-owned businesses, startup companies, innovative technologies, because they're the ones who don't have the lawyers and lobbyists to do battle in Washington. And they were the ones who were hurt in the 2 years that these rules were in place.
We're going to do a quick ID. Our guest is Roslyn Layton, and she is with the American Enterprise Institute. We're talking about all things net neutrality on What Do You Know, proudly supported and sponsored by Engel and Volker's Luxury Real Estate and our good friend Don Maddox. Arnie.
So Roslyn, from a consumer, putting on your consumer hat at the moment, what do you think are the best outcomes for the typical, not the business guy, the small business but the consumer out there who has at the moment pretty much unfettered access to the internet? They can look up anything they want, whatever's on there, and can do it without any kind of controls or restrictions, or without any price increases other than their ISP.
So, if anything, what I expect, and I would love to come on in 6 months and we can see how's it going. I would expect the consumers should see the prices go down. They would either see a combination of the prices going down, or they would be offered more content for the price that they pay today. And I would say more competition. And the reason that I say that is that you have a company like Verizon, also AT&T, they're launching 5G. You have a number of wireless technologies that are trying to compete with wireline. So for example, many people have they have cable. Maybe they're not so happy with it. The wireless companies are trying to get you to get rid of cable and then choose a new 5G technology that comes to your home through the air, so that you would get all your movies on the TV. All of that stuff would be delivered millimeter wave technology through the air to your home.
Well,
and so
that
is quite
two people that live off the
technology.
2 people that live off the grid here in Missoula, Montana. We both have wireless broadband, and we've both used Wi-Fi, and it's substandard actually to a wired connection. It just is.
Right.
I mean, you know.
Right.
You know, and
a lot of people
so on
here.
The wireline part. So let me just address the wireline part. I mean, you also have to know, and I agree. You know, it is part of the thing that's been so upsetting to me that we had 10 years to make a difference for wireline broadband, and we didn't move the needle at all. So the policies we've had so much we had so much subsidies going to supposedly, we thought, places like Montana. The money never came. So that's very upsetting to me as a person who subscribes, that I'm paying this extra amount on my bill and the money never gets to you. You know, I think that's okay. We're going to connect other Americans, and then you don't get the money.
Well,
it ends up going to Aspen, Colorado on a ski resort.
How much more do you pay than we pay? I'm confused.
No, meaning that 20% of my bill is going to, you know, universal service for my telephone service at home. I mean, about 20% of my mobile. So there are fees. I mean, this is also a key issue in economics. We're having taxes on all of our other communication services to pay for universal service that's supposed to go to high-cost areas, underserved areas. I mean, billions of dollars a year, $10 billion or so a year. And we find out that the money's not going there. And it's either lining the pockets of companies who are being fraudulent, you know, it's going into the ether, into IT projects that never gets there. And that's upsetting because, you know, if you agree, when you sign up for a contract and you're paying extra amount, you want to see that the money goes where it should. I mean, personally, I see a value to getting all Americans online. But what I would know is there's a lot of interesting ways to do it. For example, healthcare. Healthcare companies are willing to support the cost of broadband for end users. So as opposed to saying taxing people to pay extra, there's a number of companies who want to make sure that you're online. They would be willing to pay for part of your subscription so that you don't have to. In fact, they might pay the whole price because it's worth it for them to save you from having a heart attack or monitoring your heart or whatever the case may be. So there's a whole world out there. I mean, in fact, it's on the order of $30 billion a year of additional revenue from companies who are sitting on the sidelines today because these rules prohibited from them from participating. So we could have an influx of $30 to $40 billion a year to help lower your costs as an end user. And so
But doesn't this idea penalize people that don't have the money, that can't afford it? And when you talk about things like healthcare, aren't they going to be penalized just because they work a $10.50 an hour job versus making $300,000 a year? And those people are going to be able to afford better content, better healthcare.
So the more flexible your options are for broadband, the better off you are. So the more freedom that you allow for different players in the marketplace to address the needs, the better off it is. I mean, some stories you probably don't hear about. I mean, for example, in the destitute parts of the world, that people now are getting health care because they're finding innovative ways to deliver health care through. So what I'm trying to say is this isn't a question of money all the time. It's a question of engineering. It's a question of innovation. There are so many creative ways to solve the problem. And if we're just relying on there's only one kind of network that we can use and everybody has to have the same, that is the reward to the rich, at the cost. So the more flexibility that we allow, the easier it will be to solve the problem. And we've seen that everywhere.
I'm curious. I don't know the answer to this. Where does someone like a Bill Gates fall on this argument? Because he's somebody who puts his money where his mouth is and goes to third world countries and spends an awful lot of money. Where does he sit on this issue? So
Bill Gates, and he's a great example. He's personally, he's, I think, on his way to curing a number of tropical diseases. I mean, here's a case where you have a guy with his private fortune is making a difference after we've spent so much money in foreign aid, government aid, which has nothing to show for it. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, those guys have put their own money out there, and they are making a difference. He demands results, and he understands these into the details complexity of some of these tropical diseases. Bill Gates hasn't ever discussed net neutrality that I know of. I don't know his personal opinion in this. The interesting thing is Microsoft, the company that he founded, they have they would like on the one hand to have price controls that benefit itself, but meanwhile, they are doing all sorts of things on their own to deliver service to their business customers. And so, that they deliver exactly what the business customers want exactly that way, and they get the sort of networks that they want. And those companies, that is generally not regulated by the FCC, but the problems are solved in terms of what the companies need. I guess I would come back to you is I'm sure that Bill Gates, if you looked at his approach, he would want to do cost-benefit analysis. And that's what we don't have with the current approach that the governor of Montana took. He just said, I'm just doing this. He didn't conduct a cost-benefit analysis, by the way, nor did the FCC. And,
so is the New York bill similar to the Montana bill, or is the content of what Governor Cuomo did different than what Governor Bullock did here?
So the Montana bill it's an interesting thing because the Montana bill is requiring that any companies doing business with the state have to follow these rules. Now, I think it may be illegal because there's something called the market participant doctrine, where it says there is a marketplace, and if the state attempts to create a certain design in the state that's counter to the actual market, because broadband is a retail market service, that may, other court cases have shown that that's illegal. So the interesting thing is the Governor Bullock's choice is an executive order. It's not a democratically made decision. It's not done in the parliament, whatever your state house, if you will.
Legislature. Of course, you should know they only meet for 90 days every 2 years.
Right. So the legislature didn't make the choice. So the new person can come in and get rid of it. That's not a sustainable solution, first of all. But the other area is that it's illegal for a state to violate the federal policy on interstate commerce and on communications. The Communications Act says that states can regulate commerce inside the state. So if you and I called each other on a rotary telephone, I was in Billings and you were in Missoula, that's fine. The governor, the state authorities could regulate it. But Internet communications originate from outside the state of Montana, and so you can't wall off what is Internet with inside.
What did New York do that was the same or different than Montana? I was curious what Governor Cuomo did.
Yeah, no, so I'm not fully up to speed on the New York law, but I guess what I would say is what's upsetting for me is that I think that the people of Montana deserve better, that I think that you should really understand what you're trying to do, not just do symbolic politics. You should actually say what's good for the people of the state, what will drive investments, what will drive innovation, and what's good for the consumer.
Well, I can't
democratic.
I can't speak for the governor, but I'm sure he would say that's what he intended to do by doing this.
Right. Hey, Roslyn, let's just shift for a second. Are there other countries or other markets where what was proposed is working? And there's an example that we could look at where, non-net neutrality actually has worked. Right.
Well, Japan and South Korea are probably the best examples. So I would say around the world, soft rules have worked the best. There's no doubt about that. And I did my PhD on that. I looked at 53 countries. So Japan, South Korea, and the Nordic countries and Switzerland, they all had voluntary multi-stakeholder soft rules, meaning that the companies agreed to voluntary conditions, which meant that they would automatically not behave in a harmful way to consumers. They did that on their own accord. They know that the regulator could come and hammer them, but they said that, we will do this without you having to make a law. And also, we want to understand that if we want to experiment, if we want to offer different prices and different services, you will allow us to do it. And I think, South Korea and Japan are two stellar examples of high-speed, high-speed broadband.
But they take care of their citizens there.
Well, I mean, they're very different. I mean, look at the size of Wisconsin with how many they have, how many millions of people, and everyone lives inside of a high rise for the most part. So
exactly.
So it's Japan is the size of California and has half the population of the United States. So it's totally different demographics and
it's a different society.
Right, so a different society. But what I would say is Switzerland, the Nordic countries, Sweden is very similar to Montana in the sense that it's very rural. You have a lot of population and
a lot of people with blonde hair.
Yeah, blonde. Yes, and also outdoor. A rustic
active.
Arctic environment. Yes,
Roslyn. Wait, with our remaining minutes, I have to ask you: how did you get involved with the Trump administration?
Yeah, well, because we were the only people standing, my colleagues and I. I mean, in the sense that so many people were out there saying nasty things about the president. I really didn't say anything. So they wanted to have people who knew something about telecom policy who didn't disparage the president. And my policy is, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything.
Sure. That's a good adage.
But I will say this. I mean, I think it's an honor to serve the country. If you have an academic knowledge about something, it's your duty to share, to help whomever is in office, Republican or Democrat, whether or not you like the person. I mean,
right.
At a certain level, I make my academic research is publicly available. I speak to governments around the world, about trying to help them find the right set of rules for them. And so we could actually learn a lot by the other countries who've had these experiments. Sure. We don't need to recreate the wheel.
Here are the 2 points that I would ask you to just focus on for a moment. I think it's probably realistic to say that we're not going to end up in a bifurcated situation where the wealthy have all this first class internet complete access and everyone else is left with slow connections, and not much content and all that. The all or none scenario is probably unrealistic. However, there is a consumer skepticism based on experiences with similar industries that left unregulated, you might slip more into that realm than you should slip into. I mean, there's no one out there who says they love their satellite TV provider. They love Dish Network. They love DirecTV. They always have, every time I look at my bill, it goes up for some reason. So there is a healthy skepticism that if you let all of these companies, do the honor system, that it's just not going to work. So what do you say to the average consumer out there about that? Right.
Well, so I think we have an interesting time now because these rules have been removed and we have experiments going on, and they can put the company's feet to the fire and see, do they actually do what they say? And I think it is a great opportunity, and I think consumers should pay attention. And the other thing, there's also a role for the FCC here. I mean,
yes.
The current FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, he has staked his reputation on closing the digital divide. And he's put all of his energy into trying to improve the situation in rural America. So a year from now, 2 years from now, my hope would be you see things are measurably better in terms of your broadband experience, that it's faster, cheaper, more high-tech, whatever the case may be. If it isn't, I think we should go back to say, look, if the experiment didn't work, we're done.
Well, it's also, as you know, it's not just rural areas. The Urban League is against net neutrality because they think it will hamper investment in minority communities. However, you already earlier alluded to the fact that you're paying that you had paid a surcharge, under the assumption that some of that was going to lead to investment in places like Montana, and it hadn't happened. So we need we need something to move it to the level in which what the companies claim they're going to do is actually going to get done.
Correct. You're absolutely right. So that's what I would say. I mean, the proof has to be in the pudding. I mean, this is all about, there's a belief here that the competition will win the day, and I think we have the opportunity to see that be the case. If it isn't,
Right.
that's the wonderful thing about our democracy. We can, every 2 years we get a chance to vote them out and put in someone else. I mean, the governor will run for re-election at some point or term out or whatever.
He's termed out.
Yeah. So I mean, there's another case where you can also take that kind of decision at the end of your term.
Sure.
But I mean, I'm sure that the governor is a nice person and has his heart in the right place. But this is also an issue that's so politicized. You have to understand that for a lot of Democrats, they raise money on saying the internet, save the internet, send $5. And so there is, so it's a fundraising issue in a very challenging environment.
Sure.
But what I would say is, I think that we need to, when we look at this, we have to understand there's a lot of issues at play. It's not just the internet we care about. We care about a lot of things.
Sure.
And it all has to. And so what you've proven to me on your show is that ordinary people can talk it through and sort of realize, wow,
there's nobody more ordinary than Scott and myself when it comes to this topic. But I do want to say, just in general, as we look at this, one of the most, I think, misleading things about this, putting politics aside, is that the internet is free and open right now, which it isn't. And people take it, they believe this
fallacy.
This fallacy that, hey, the internet's open and free. It's not free.
Right.
And it's not, and when you want certain content, you have to pay for it. When you want certain access, when you want to be on Amazon Prime on the internet, you have to pay for it.
Right.
You don't get everything for free. So I mean,
I think no one's pulling over the wool over your eyes in Montana. That's for sure. I think you people are too clever for that. But let me say this: that I think that what's happening in this debate, because for a long time it was driven by the internet companies, kind of as a religion. Now people are saying, well, wait a second, you're blocking certain content. You take down, you don't like this speech and you take it off Twitter. So now people are saying, well, wait a second, the internet's not just my internet connection, it's all these other things. And what's the standard? Are we going to have a consistent set of rules? Or are different players going to play by different rules? And how does this work? And, that's actually a healthy discussion. And it underscores the complexity.
Sure. Let me add one other.
But there's one other point you should know. I don't mean to be too fancy.
No, go ahead.
The internet's not the end of innovation. As wonderful as it is, there are many people who have been, a lot of entrepreneurs, like you saw the rocket go up into space yesterday, Elon Musk.
The two booster rockets landing simultaneously was one of the coolest things I'd ever seen.
He's doing space on 1/3 of the price of NASA. So the internet is not going to be the same today and a year from now. And other people, they're innovating into blockchain and other things. So what we're talking about today is not the end of the road. And we may be, as we go into the future, we may think of different sorts of networks and services. So we shouldn't have a kind of view that this is the end all be all and it's just my cable box at home. That's all I care about.
Let me just add one component to this for our listeners, so maybe you can help explain. Every once in a while in this kind of conversation, the dark net, peers its ugly head. How does that fit in with all of this?
Well, so basically, it's not. If you know about rational expectations, if people expect that if some innovators and entrepreneurs, they expect that the internet's regulated, they will go to other places, or they will try to innovate in areas where the government can't control what they're doing. Encryption is a great example, right? We're concerned about government snooping, so we want to encrypt our communications. And, of course, the FBI, they want to find a way around that because they want to surveil and so on. I mean, we understand that they want to catch bad guys. But in any case, so whatever you regulate, people will be smarter than your regulation, or they will find a workaround. So Title II was put on the telephone network for a long time, and that telephone network didn't get any better. The phone quality, the voice quality is the same in 2016 as it was in 1934. So people just said, look, we're not going to put our money into that. We're going to go into other things, internet. We're going to go outside. So the same way, when you decide the government's going to regulate the internet, you create the incentive for innovators to go where they are not controlled. Mm-hmm. So not that I know exactly what it will be, but that's why we have this business with blockchain, and folks will figure out how to do an alternative internet, and right. That's already happening.
Sure.
Well, Roslyn, you've been a delightful guest.
This has been fascinating, Roslyn.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd love to come back. I want to hear how it's going. So
you will definitely have you back.
You have our numbers, you have our digits, and so does Patrick. We look forward to having you back.
You guys are champs. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. You take care.
Arnie, Roslyn could talk, but she had a lot of good things to say.
Well, there's a lot to talk about in terms of this issue, and it is political. I do have to say, in fairness to our governor, I don't think it was a partisan stunt. I think there's a lot of people in Montana, both Democrats and Republicans, that don't want more cost associated with using the internet. The internet has become the lifeline for a place like Montana.
It has.
Where you can stay in contact with the mainstream of the world, by the internet. In some places there's no television service. Satellite is virtually disappeared, and the internet and services through the internet are the lifeblood of operation. And she did mention an important point. Without regulatory support on the internet, which has only been in place for 2 years.
Right.
I mean, what happened really was from 1996 to 2016, we were using rules that existed in the infancy of the internet. And it's become much more complicated. So the Obama administration wanted to put some rules and regulations to maintain what they considered was unfettered, free access. Everybody had the opportunity to get the same kind of service. And when the FCC voted to do what it did, there was reaction around, and I think the governor heard a lot from Montana consumers that we don't want to pay more.
Right.
And what he did was he couldn't regulate what the consumer got, but he said, at least for the company that I run, the state of Montana, we're not going to do business with companies that don't follow the rules.
Right.
And I don't think there's a constitutional issue or a trade FTC
she's
issue.
Bringing it up like there is.
I know. Well, for somebody who said she was nonpartisan, I think there is some partisanship in there. But I don't think, and the governor of New York did a similar kind of thing, saying the state of New York, which does hundreds of millions of dollars of business, is not going to deal with someone who's going to operate in a restrictive way.
Sure. Well, I thought, a very compelling conversation. It's not as clear as we may have thought at the outset of the conversation.
But the most compelling thing I think she said, which is why you can't really allow this to be Scout's honor.
Right.
You're paying fees for universal service so that people here in Montana can benefit, and we don't. They haven't made that investment that they claimed they would make.
And by the way, I am happy I have a new provider now, just so you know, that is giving me better connectivity. But again, it is, a lot of people like you and I are off the beaten path a little bit, and we're not even that far off the beaten path.
No. We're actually we're 2 miles from the airport. I mean, we're
But in Montana, you can be 2 miles from the airport and still have very limited connectivity.
Sure.
So, I think it may impact a state like ours a little differently than it would a more populous state, or a state where.
But there are a lot of states, Mississippi, Alaska. There are places like that where you would be literally off the grid.
Literally off the grid. Well, look, a good debate, a good conversation to be had. We'll have it again in a couple of months with her.
Yes.
All right. I'll see you next week.
Next week, Scott. Bye.
Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO.